Okay, hi everybody. I wanted to give you a little bit of instruction on the synthesis. We haven't really talked about this at all in class yet, but it is important for us to think about this pretty important assignment here within 492. It's one of our major assignments, and I want to make sure you all have what you need in order to get started on it over the next week or so. As I've discussed, we really want to move through the synthesis, make sure we have a first draft before we move on to discussing the Capstone Symposium presentation. So I've shown you this graphic before to kind of lay out the timeline and the steps we go through in order to complete these assignments. In the case of the synthesis, first step is, of course, coming up or refining our question or thesis. And I've talked a little bit about whether or not you want to stick with your research question or move on to a more rhetorical question that will guide your synthesis and presentation. I want to talk about the guidelines of the synthesis before I talk about the roadmap outline in a little bit more detail. So first of all, with the synthesis, it's a lot like any other research paper with some minor exceptions. We've tried to adopt a format that suits most types of academic writing, so that it's a little bit different than, say, a scientific research paper, because we really are trying to allow for the representation of different disciplines that have slightly different ways of presenting information. But in a nutshell, these are the pieces that we've decided on. So you should have a title page that includes your abstract. And then in terms of the other sections, there's an introduction. The introduction should provide the rationale and the background for your work. And many people will draw heavily on material from their proposal in order to lay the groundwork for their synthesis. Really, the idea behind the introduction is to establish the problem that you're addressing, provide the background necessary to understand the question and to understand why it's important to a broad audience. So really describing that rationale is important. Then there's the research question or a thesis. And really, it doesn't matter if you want to phrase things as a research question or as a thesis that you are arguing. Different students have different perspectives on this. I personally like the research question, or as we've talked about, sort of that rhetorical question, because I think it's a little bit easier to think about the answers to that question. It's a little bit more direct. But I can be swayed to think about a thesis as well. The next section is the internship and methods. And this is a pretty important piece. The internship, of course, is a description of the work that you did as part of 491, who you worked with, what you did with them, and so on. And this is setting the stage or laying the groundwork for describing your expertise, right? Because you worked on a particular project for a quarter, maybe 3 months or longer. And so through that experience, that anecdotal experience, the experience of the internship, you've had a lot of anecdotal observations that you've made, and that is stuff that you can draw on as you talk through your synthesis. So you really want to set the stage for your expertise by describing your internship. You should also be describing the methods that you used to develop the evidence for your results. And in the case of the methods, oftentimes students will have done interviews or surveys or collected or processed data in other ways. And so describing those methods is pretty important. The internship and methods section should include at least a few references, particularly references or citations that have to do with methodological materials. The following section then is the findings, or really what amounts to the answers to the research question, right? So the findings section should be more or less a direct response to the research question. And within those findings, some students find that it's easy to arrange the findings around subheadings. with one subheading for each of your major findings. But then those findings are supported by evidence. That you compare and contrast them with the other scholarly knowledge on the topic, those citations and references, and you bring in the data and other anecdotal observations that you can make. The last section, the implications or broader significance section, is a really interesting one because rather than just restating your findings, what I really would like you to do is think about, okay, what comes next? If we assume that your findings are, they're interesting pieces of information or answers to your research question, what do we do with that information? What is the logical progression from your findings to making some, broader significant contribution? This could include next steps. It could include sort of the operationalizing your work into policy or education or outreach. There's a lot of different ways that you can frame the implication section, but I do want you to think broadly about the work and be solution oriented if you can. All right, so those are the major components. Of course, there's also going to be a literature cited section. There's going to be visual aids, which I tend to think work best if placed at the end of the document so that we don't have to worry about odd formatting. And also an appendix that summarizes your deliverables from your internship. We'll talk about each one of those things in a second. So, title page should be descriptive and professional. The title of your synthesis is really the formal title of your capstone and ends up being what we read at the graduation celebration. Your name, your site supervisor's name, faculty advisor's name, and the abstract should all appear on the title page. We've talked a little bit about the background and context section, but the internship does need to be described in adequate detail that your audience can understand its relationship to the rest of your work. It should describe your firsthand experience. It should describe what you did, and it should reference the deliverables in the appendix. We put this section early within the paper because, as I said, it explains your qualifications for the assertions that you make later, especially in their findings section. The important thing to note, though, is that your internship is just a case study for exploring your bigger, broader research question, and it's not really the focus of your paper per se. Really, we want to know how your internship supports your thesis, or for instance, your research question, and provides examples of larger issues. Methods, again, succinctly explain the methods and approaches used to accomplish your project objectives and address your research question. And of course, you want to include citations for the methods that you employed. All right, so as I said, the results section, or arguments, findings, we call it different things. This is going to describe the key findings that directly address your research question. I think that using subheadings for this section makes a lot of sense. And for each one of your findings, which again should be a subheading, you should incorporate evidence from your internship. This is the anecdotal observations you made. Include the literature, and it should include any of the data that you collected from a variety of different approaches and methods. Implications, again, you can restate your question or thesis and main findings, but it's not really just repetition. This could be also including recommendations for future research or improvement to current practices, next steps, and the like. Citations, as I said, you really want to support your findings with work from the published literature and papers, reports, firsthand experience, data, personal communications with experts. It is really important not to just rely solely on one citation source within your various sections of your paper. You know, if you find yourself citing the same source over and over and over again, really consider whether or not it makes sense to look for other sources to help corroborate those patterns. The idea is to draw widely on the literature so you can demonstrate your knowledge of the literature and the depth of support you have for your ideas. Also, try to avoid relying heavily on long block quotes. Whenever possible, paraphrase the content rather than citing block quotes, because honestly, block quotes can break up the momentum of your paper and can require additional information to contextualize them. And frankly, it's somewhat lazy writing, because what I really want to know is your interpretation of information rather than just a whole bunch of quotations of someone else's work. All right, visual aids should also be included. Pictures worth 1,000 words, and having a lot of good visual aids can be really important. Make sure that they're high resolution and not pixelated. Make sure the text is large enough to be seen. If you're reproducing material from other sources, sometimes things like legends and scale bars on maps and things might be too small. Make sure that the axes are labeled. Each visual aid needs to have a descriptive caption that explains the figure well enough to stand alone, and those captions should be numbered and then referenced in the text. Make sure that images and other figures from other sources have credits where necessary. If there are things that you didn't put together yourself or produce yourself, you need to have credits and sources for that information. And just as a reminder, table captions go above tables, while figure captions and captions for other types of visuals go below those figures. The last part of the synthesis is an appendix. We usually call it Appendix A, and that is a summarized list or table describing each one of the deliverables you produced during your internship. Way back in the olden days, early on, we had students essentially compile and staple all of their deliverables to the end of their final paper. That actually was not a really great approach, and it was just sort of wasteful. Also, a lot of students have started producing deliverables that can't be printed very easily. And so instead of printing things and stapling it all together, we just ask that you summarize your deliverables as an appendix to your synthesis paper. And again, there's an example here, and also this example appears on Canvas. All right, so that's the synthesis. But the first step, or I should say the next step in producing the synthesis, is actually producing the roadmap outline. If you look at this the structure of our approach to dealing with the synthesis process, one of the early things we need to do is the roadmap outline. And the reason we do this is that the roadmap outline is extremely helpful, really, for you for developing the structure for your ideas, and for me, your site supervisor and faculty advisor, so we can provide you with feedback. And I know that a lot of students think, oh man, I hate outlines. Why do I have to do this? Honestly, it is in your best interest, because rather than waiting for you to produce a lengthy paper, which, let's face it, could be a lot of work for you. If you produce an outline early, then we can give you feedback and help point you in the right direction. When I say we, I mean me, your site supervisor and faculty advisor. In order to produce that outline, you need to use correct outline format. And as a refresher, when we do outline format, Section headings do not get Roman numerals, letters, or numbers, but the main points within paragraphs, the topic sentences within paragraphs, do receive Roman numerals. The main points within paragraphs receive capital letters, subpoints, numbers, and then subsequent subpoints, lowercase letters, and then so on and so forth. And the idea is that each subsequent paragraph is numbered such that when I look at the outline, or any of us look at your outline, we can get a sense for how much detail you have within the various sections by the number of Roman numerals. This is just an example, but please do follow this format because it will make it easier for us to give you good feedback. There is an example, I think at least one example on Canvas of a roadmap outline. And what you'll see is that we actually do expect a fair amount of detail within the various sections. You should include the details in terms of Roman numerals, uppercase letters, numbers, lowercase letters, and so on. I would also like to see citations so that we can get a sense for how well you're incorporating the primary literature. And whenever possible, also incorporating visual aids. So I should see indication of where the visual aids will come within your outline, as well as the coverage of the various publications and literature within the various sections. And here's just an example of how you might organize the arguments or results section. In this case, there are not only Roman numerals for the various paragraphs, but then there are some additional headings for some of the main features of those results. Again, implications, broader significance broken up into a number of paragraphs as well. And the reference section that indicates or demonstrates or shows all of the references that are incorporated within the various sections of the synthesis outline. We also like to have the visuals at the end of the outline with captions. Here are just a couple of examples. Photos are great. Charts, like pie charts, can work. I'm not a huge fan of pie charts. I think there are other types of visuals that are more effective. And I would encourage you to take a look at the short lecture on visuals to get some other ideas about that. And then, of course, the appendix as well. And so in a fully fleshed out roadmap outline, you're going to have all of these components. So again, that is the synthesis roadmap and the roadmap outline. These are two assignments that we really want to get on this month, starting with the roadmap outline. The roadmap outline in particular, I'd like you to have completed in time for our one-on-one meetings and any meetings you might have with your faculty advisor, because that's how we can give you the best guidance on your work. All right, if you have any questions about these assignments, please let me know. The guidelines are on Canvas associated with the assignments, and should be enough detail there for you to get started. All right, y'all, you have a great day, and again, let me know if you have any questions.